G'day team, Adam Kogan here from SSW TV. Welcome to the SSW.NET user group. We are holding it here in Sydney. Sadly, we are under lockdown and the audience is empty. However, we do have our communities remote, and I know they've been chomping at the bit. I've seen the chats already. We also have our friends who are around the world as well. So welcome everyone. Tonight we have the SSW Tech News, and of course we have the main event. And the main event is Luke Parker. He's coming to us from the SSW Chapel in Brisbane. And he's talking about Blazor, which seems to be a super popular topic with all the devs here and around the world. We love Blazor. In fact, for us, it's becoming more popular than Angular and React. He's doing a talk talking about the UI, especially with reusable components and having a nice design with AntDesign, which also comes from China. So that's going to be fascinating. But first, let's just jump into the tech news. Welcome everyone to the SSW Tech News. My name is Adam Kogan, and let's jump in. The first news that we have, we'll talk about VS Code. And VS Code have updates all the time. And this month there's lots. One might take your eye, that is this automatic language detection. And this is when you are pasting code into VS Code. We talked in the last couple of months about some of this cool stuff, this AI stuff that went with GitHub Copilot, and last month how we went through the natural language which grabs data from APIs and plonks it in. This is helping us directly with code. So here's a nice example. You're on a web page, you're seeing some C# code that does exactly what you want it to do, but you paste it over here, you might be in F#, or in this case it was Python. It will automatically paste it exactly the way you want it. So that's pretty cool. A typical example might be something like this, where you jump onto a page, you get some JSON. Here's some JSON. Whoa, I might copy that. And then you want to format that. So here is an example that you might want it to look like. If you jump into, I have VS Code here. Where is he? So let me just jump into VS Code, and we will have so here's VS Code. Just check you're on 1.60 with this new feature, and come here, go create a new file. And if you look down the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that says plain text. If you paste that JSON, see how it automatically formats it to JSON. So that's not a small thing to do, and in lots of cases that's going to be quite helpful. You could also, I guess, if I would like them to go the next step, which would be to go Alt-Shift-F. So I'll just Alt-Shift-F, and it could format it. I wish it did that automatic formatting. In fact, I wish that command was the same as Visual Studio, with being Control-KD. That would be much nicer if they're all consistent. But anyway, I would love you to just put a comment down there if this is cool or uncool. All right. So let's jump ahead, and in the GitHub world, there's lots of stuff happening there. Damien Brady did a good talk to a bunch of developers here in Sydney about what's going on with GitHub issues and how to handle that in a more enterprise organized way. I thought this was pretty cool. You can, GitHub has this CodeQL. That's their code analysis engine for looking at the code. And they have a little example here how you could try to do a commit, and I'll just right-click on that just so you can see the image a bit clearer. So let's just say you try to commit that, it would give you this warning saying that's no good. Now, this type of stuff is extremely important that we have less junk getting into our code bases. Down here, they just talk about how you can make your own. And so basically, you're making your own code QL queries. And that's pretty important. I'm not certain. I think this is the world's best place that you're always getting your warnings. I personally would prefer it in my IDE. But you know, the best tools out there are expensive. Here's one, SonarQube. That is one that does that in the IDE, and that is the other equivalent. But also, this feature reminds me a little bit, for the old timers in TFS, had gated check-ins, so it's a little like that. Anyway, I'd love to know what you think of that. Let's move on to space. Do you think that Azure has enough services? We now have Azure Space. Do we need this? Well, I'm not an astronaut, so possibly not, but I would think that it's worth taking a look at because you might be surprised. There's a few cool videos here about how, you know, scenarios about using it. It's driving SpaceX stuff. So they're using it as well, Elon Musk's company. So lots of cool stuff here. Now, here is an example. This took my eye. I came from a farm up in the Hunter Valley, and I saw there was a problem with cows escaping. I've actually never seen a cow escape from paddocks, or if they did, it was only the odd few every now and then. But I didn't know it was a big problem. In Australia, we have a big problem of feral cows and feral buffaloes, apparently. And they have this new program called Space Cows. And that is using AI, it's using these services, and they're trying to work out where all these buffaloes are so they can tell the people on the ground. So take a look at this photo. Here is an example of the damage these guys do. So they roam around, and I guess they must have a fence here for, maybe they've got some equipment in there or something. But this forms a nice little A/B test, and you can see that's what it should look like, but it's been destroyed everywhere. And Microsoft is working with the CSIRO, that's our research institute. And those scientists have come up with essentially, I should play the video, that'll do a good explanation of it.
Across more than 22,000 square kilometres in the northern region of Australia, from Arnhem Land to the Cape York Peninsula. Using the innovative combination of Indigenous knowledge, low Earth orbit satellites, and Microsoft Azure Artificial Intelligence platform to interpret the data, Indigenous rangers have new tools to manage their land and create new economic opportunities. What is Space Cows? It means we can see a cow or buffalo from space. We can use cloud and AI to predict its behaviour, to track the herd, to protect the land. Indigenous communities, Microsoft and the CSIRO collaborating with a range of partners, land, space and people working together for a better future for the planet. A shared future.
Hey, super cool. I knew that cane toads were a problem. I did not know about this problem. Now, this Azure Space services, mainly people are going to use to look at Earth. But they also have a whole lot of services that you can look at satellites, or you can look out into the rest of the solar system. And here is a group in Adelaide, South Australia. There is a group there called the Australian Institute for Machine Learning. And those guys are using the same Azure Space services, and they've got their own project called Project AI Off Earth. And they're using it to remotely control satellites. They're using it to look at space junk that is going around. You can see that they're doing a whole lot of data and cognitive systems. They're trying to mainly support automation. They're trying to do stuff that is helping to establish smart cities as well, and to address this sustainability and look at other environmental changes. Environmental changes obviously are happening to us, and these services could end up being incredibly important. So that's what's going on in Adelaide. And I think if you're an Aussie, this will be interesting to you, because Microsoft Australia, which are pretty close to our government, obviously everyone in Canberra, are very nicely licensed for Microsoft services. But they have also created a lot of these programs. And here is another one where if you're a startup and you're doing stuff, Microsoft are giving you free licenses to use these services to create your startup. So, basically they're also investing, they're also forming a partnership, and those guys are just part of that program. So all pretty cool, lots of potentially innovative solutions will come out of Australia based on that information. I would certainly love to know if this is up anyone's alley. Let's move on. There is flexible RAM coming in the hardware world. I'd never thought of this being needed, and potentially this is a solution. Looking for a problem, and we've got to think of some problems. So, some examples. This is where if you put your thinking caps on, you might think of something useful, but they have given some examples that you could put it on clothing, all right? So maybe you can put it on each piece of, jacket done. You could maybe measure measure how long it's been since you had it washed, or what bacteria is in it, or where it came from, where it was made. You could also use it for food. Apparently you could detect bacteria, and if that's the case, you could put it inside like a jar of jam, and you'd know if it was off or not. I read something a while ago which said that one of the reasons that some people think we get cancer a lot more these days is because we're putting a lot more stuff in the fridge, and we eat things that are way older than they used to be, and you don't know that they've got fungus on it and you just eat it. Where we used to just see it and just store it for a day or so. So that might be interesting. Apparently you can also put it on your skin, so that might detect how your physiology is going. You could maybe have a heart operation and put it inside your body and be getting readings on how the heart is beating, how strong it is, whatever. So moving on, let's talk about Bitcoin. And I grabbed this because I, for some reason, assumed that I was going to see some straight line up, but I don't. I think I only see little ups every time Elon Musk tweets about Bitcoin or something. So there was a big development in Bitcoin this week, and I'll tell you all about it. I'm going to play you a video. So let's play this. It's in El Salvador.
Bitcoin to buy clothes, snacks, even the daily newspaper, instead of US dollars, is now an option to the people in El Salvador, as the country becomes the first in the world to adopt volatile crypto as its national currency. It's a big test for Bitcoin in the real world and for Salvadorans. To get them started, the government is giving $30 to people who sign up to an e-wallet called Chivo, which allows for the automatic conversion of dollars to Bitcoin and vice versa. On day one, a number of technical issues were reported in the country with the app. While some businesses welcomed this crypto experiment, 80% of Salvadorans have little or no confidence in Bitcoin, and some have opposed the move.
One big reason is because people don't want their wages to be denominated in Bitcoin. It's related to the sharp fluctuations in value that Bitcoin has. Also, a lot of people think that El Salvador is not really prepared for this type of adoption. A lot of people don't have smartphones, and if they do, they don't have data plans.
On the day it happens, stops working, and when that gets going again, they had lost, it was actually 16% by the time. You know, you're trying to get someone to, like a programmer, to help you with Bitcoin stuff. A developer from, you know, El Salvador versus another country that doesn't have Bitcoin mandatory, they now have great experience, so that might be good for them. Let's move on to Apple. Apple today announced some cool stuff. We have a new iPhone. What does it do new? It has a bigger battery, okay? We now have a blue option. That's pretty cool. I wouldn't want blue, but some people might. You also have a new iPad. And what I did think this was cool, the new watch. Where's the watch? There's the new watch. It also has some services, so I have the older watch, so that would be nice to grab that. That would be awesome. So they've got some services. You might have noticed that the Peloton stocks went down after, you know, everybody found out there was going to be free. I think they give 3 free months for Fitness Plus on iOS, so that's good. Now, what's bad for Apple is this Epic Games story. If you remember a few months ago, we had Richard Campbell here who was discussing what was going on with this lawsuit. Well, now we have an answer, and Epic Games essentially won. The district judge, Yvonne Rogers, she said, hey, Epic, what you were doing before, which was trying to allow your customers to use a payment system outside the App Store, that's cool. That's allowed. So there's the green light for that. Lots of game developers would be happy. Lots of people selling stuff on the App Store or with apps, you know. They can now do this legally. She did also say that Epic had to pay as well for the 30% for what they had not paid. I do want to tell you this, only because it's bloody bad. There was an announcement that there is a vulnerability on Mac and iOS. The vulnerability is horrific. Basically, it's a WebKit vulnerability. So the browser on say the phone, you can control the phone. So there's going to be lots of non-technical people that you know. Go up to their phone, go to settings, go software update, make sure they get it, because it is very bad. I already know some people that have had their phones attacked through this vulnerability. So, couple more pieces of news. Blue Origin, that's Jeff Bezos' space company, they are not very happy that SpaceX, Elon Musk's company, landed a contract from NASA, so they're suing them. Okay, does this remind you of when AWS sued the government, the military, over Azure getting a contract? So obviously there's some, they don't take losing easy. Now, I'll finish off with the last piece of news. I thought this is funny. Obviously, lots of people are interested in the Nobel Peace Prize, but that's for the best advancements. This Ig Nobel has been going on for a long time. They award prizes for kind of funny research, because lots of research is done around the world and it's kind of odd. Here's some beards and transporting rhinos upside down, and what is more, they're just doing random studies on lots of things. So you can learn all about facial hair stuff. I thought this was cool. They were analyzing whether politicians that are fatter lead to more corruption in their country. So there is definitely, they found a correlation. I could have told you that by analyzing North Korea, I think. But anyway, they've worked that out. They studied all these countries and got a lot of research. So very, very cool. And they also analysed what chewing gum says about you, and they analysed all the bacteria, how to get better breathing. What was the research? The research was you have better breathing after sex. How interesting. All right, with that, let's move on to the main event. The main event is Luke Parker, who is going to be talking to us about Blazor and UIs and AntDesign. So this is going to be awesome. So I'll hand it over. Take it away, Luke.
Tips and this great framework with you guys. So a little bit about me. I'm a Blazor specialist. I've been using it since it first came out in its early previews. And as a disclaimer, I am an AntBlazor team member, so some of the opinions you hear might be a little bit biased, but you get what you get. So on GitHub, I'd appreciate a follow if you want to see some Blazor work that I put there, and on my blog, I blog about Blazor and AntDesign quite often. Just to mention, before I jump in, we have an app on the App Store called SSW Rewards. So if you search SSW on the App Store, you can scan a QR code at the end to get some points to earn prizes like a flask or some Google Home devices. Okay, so the agenda, I'll start off with an overview of Blazor and some competing component libraries and my opinions on them and the pros and cons. And then I'll jump into some demos, how to get set up with AntBlazor, and then a few more specific and complex demos. And finally, I'll have a summary. So let's kick it off with the overview. So where did Blazor start? Blazor started with basically this image. The main marketing that Microsoft gave was this button where you can have C# code in line with your HTML. So everyone should be pretty familiar with this code that's up on the screen here, where it's basically a button and a counter that demonstrated that you can make something work with C#. Except, how do you build beautiful UIs and put trust into Blazor as a technology and framework? When it came out, the open source world looked pretty much as barren as this. But where are we now? Blazor's been in production for a couple years now with an active open source community supported by professionals and open source activists alike. So a good example is there are many UI frameworks that you can choose between to build your next project with. To name a few, there's MatBlazor, Radzin, Modblazer, DevExpress, Syncfusion, Blazorize, and of course AntBlazor. So these cover the main UI frameworks that you're used to from plain HTML, like Bootstrap, Material Design, and others. So just as a quick overview of how many projects and how active the community is, if you do a quick search on GitHub for Blazor, I did this yesterday and I got a little under 18,000 results. So these obviously vary from huge projects to little projects, but as a quick estimate, you can see that it is an active community and supported in production. So to get started with my comparisons, I'll look at Radzin Blazor first. So this is a unique one in that it's designed for Blazor first. It's not ported from plain HTML or Angular or React. So it is the upside that it's built in Blazor native and primarily. However, the documentation's lacking, and because it doesn't come from another community, there's not as big of a user base, and as such, you don't get as much support, forums, demos, code samples, and that sort of thing you'd expect from other libraries. There's AntBlazor. This is quite a popular choice because it's material design, which everyone should know if they've used Angular or React. It's quite popular. So this is just a normal port and Razor, and it works great. The only downside is its main upside, that it's material design. What does that mean? Well, I mean just that it's material design basically is a philosophy primarily. So if you have a designer, that's great. Maybe for larger enterprise applications where you have resources allocated to UI design separate to a developer, AntBlazor could be a great choice. But for this talk and for many hobbyists, I'm sure you just want to be directed into how to do a UI and just build your code first. So let's compare the next one. So we have Modblazer. This is another great choice. It looks beautiful. So it's a modern design, like I said. It loads pretty quickly compared to other packages which have quite big sizes. And there's pretty good documentation, actually. So this is another great option if you want to just copy some samples and tinker it with your data. However, there are a few steps to get set up, and it has the same issue with the others, where it is less directed in how to get set up with your layout and UI flow as a general experience. Finally, another great package is Blazorize, which is unique in that it basically abstracts the UI framework from your UI code. So if you want to build your basically HTML and structure your data on your page and then pick a UI framework afterwards, you can choose this, because with Blazorize, you essentially just say, I want you to use Bootstrap, Material Design, AntDesign, or many others, and it'll update it automatically with no code changes. So this is another great choice. However, because it tries to be compatible with many UI frameworks, it does a lot of things mostly well. It doesn't do one thing great, which is what I think AntDesign does. So finally, we have AntBlazor. I love AntBlazor. So it has an active open source community. So if you ever find a feature you want in one of the components, you can simply just create a pull request. It'll get reviewed within a day and most likely get merged into the next version. It has beautiful component design. So it comes from AntDesign, which obviously is an existing component library with its sister component library, AntD for React. And my downside, as I said earlier, is a bit biased, that it's too good. So I guess that is actually a positive. So I'll move it to the other side. But now I look too biased. So let me just add a quick con. There we go. At a glance, it looks like I'm giving everything a unbiased opinion, that there's no cons as a con. So I think I've introduced a little bit about Blazor component libraries and where they came from. So let's hop into some demos. So my first demo, I want to essentially just explain to you and show you how quick it is to get set up with AntDesign from a no project setup into getting it running. And then I will extend that a little bit more, which might surprise you a little bit. So we'll do this AntBlazor boilerplate first. So I've got this demo solution here, and I've got another demo open right now, but I've got a folder here called AntBlazor boilerplate. So let's create a new project, and I'll make a Blazor app, and we'll call this AntBlazor boilerplate. And for the sake of the demo, it doesn't matter whether you use Blazor Server or Blazor WebAssembly. I'm just going to use Server. You can pick any. It doesn't matter. So one of the main things that I love about AntBlazor is that the documentation is very, very comprehensive. So one of the main takeaways, if you take nothing else away from this talk, is that you can get all of your code samples essentially straight from the documentation website. So that's basically what I'm going to walk you through right now. So let's open up a browser, and we can go to AntBlazor.com and go to Getting Started and just simply scroll down. So you'll notice that it says add the package. So let's just follow their steps real quick. As a demo example, I wanted to actually do a stopwatch of how long this takes. So I'm just going to open up a Google stopwatch and we'll search stopwatch. And let's hit start. And let's try a feature coming with Windows 11 where I'll put these side by side. So I'll put the timer in the top right and I'll put our code in the bottom, the left, and the documentation down here. So it looks like it's actually working, a nice preview feature you can look forward to in the Windows 11 update coming soon. So we built this boilerplate. What's the next step? So register the services. So if you're familiar with ASP.NET Core, you'll know, of course, there's startup.cs. And in Blazor server, this looks very similar to any API project you have. So, of course, I should add the package first. So let's go in NuGet, install in Blazor boilerplate, hit install. Give it a second to restore. Let's downgrade to the NuGet package instead of my local published version, which is 1.0 by default, so you don't get the NuGet package when you're trying to make changes. Okay, great. So now the documentation shows you how to change it between WebAssembly and server. So it says in pages HTML for server, which if you've used it is the same as your index. So it just says copy paste this in. So let's do that now. So if we go to pages, host CS HTML, and we can simply just add this inside the head tag and paste it in. So it looks great there. Add namespace in imports.razor. Sure, let's do that. So imports.razor. Let's go in using, go to the end, paste this in. And finally, we just have to add this ant container to our app.razor. This ant container essentially allows you to have global actions irrelevant of the route or the current page, which makes sense from where it's put in. So if you have a pop-up or a modal or a draw or messages, these persist between page changes depending on how long you want them to show for or if they show permanently. And finally, we can reference it in a Razor component. So let's just try out the demo in our index.razor, and we'll just remove everything existing and put in the button. So let's give this a build. So we'll point it to AntBlazor boilerplate, hit debug, and give it a second to build. So it should be starting up in a second. So there we go. In about 2 minutes, just under 3 minutes, we got a AntDesign component working. You'll see it hovers, has a little bit of an outline when you click it. The standard things you'd expect from an AntDesign button if you're familiar with it. Now I want to take the getting started one step further, which is the unique part that I love about AntBlazor documentation, and the same with AntDesign actually. So one thing I want as a primarily back-end engineer is to be able to have the UI and user experience story told for me. And the way you can get that is with layouts, pre-made. It's great to have these beautiful components, but if you chuck it in using the default template you get with Blazor, it still looks unpolished. Everyone sees demos with these and it just doesn't look great. So let's try and make it one step better. So I will actually just resume this timer and keep it as part of this getting started step. So the great part of this documentation is there's another tab called components. So if you don't know the name of a component or you just want a quick overview of what this library provides, you can actually just go to this overview page and have a quick scroll through and have a good idea of what components they offer. So maybe you're not sure what UI component you need for your particular piece of data or form you need. You could even just scroll through here and have a quick idea and think of it as you go. So for this, there's a great one at the top called layout. And as I mentioned briefly in this talk, they have a lot of code samples. So here, say you want header, content, and footer, or a cider, but inside the header and footer. There's, a lot more examples like this. But the beautiful part is all these demos have a little button here called show code. So I can scroll through here and at random pick any of these that I might like and just copy it in and use it. So let's say I want a fixed cider. Why not? Because maybe I have a lot of content and, maybe I'm working on an internal project which outputs a lot of data, but there's a lot of menu items. I can just go in here, select show code, do the typical Stack Overflow experience where you copy paste. But I'll leave out the style because this is for the demo where it has a little bit of extra CSS we don't need. And in the Blazor main layout, I can paste this in, ignoring everything except for this layout base to make sure it's still a layout. I can leave in these demo menu items, and let's just get rid of this content because we want it to actually serve as a typical layout. So as a visual idea, it also describes itself. We've got a layout component, we've got a cider, we've got another layout with a header and a content and a footer. So even without knowing, Bootstrap, where it might have some, 2-letter acronyms and a number, you can read a word and basically know what you're getting. So let's just finish up this demo, and instead of having this div, we'll just put body. So if you've never built a custom layout, this body basically puts in what you have in your page routes. And if you're not familiar with which route you're getting, in the app.razor, the default layout will give you that main layout there. And of course, you can override this. So let's once again, now we've got this layout going, hit F5 and give it a second to start running. So this should run pretty quick. And there we go. I mean, we have a nav that works. We've got this beautiful color scheme. There's one small improvement. The content doesn't take up the whole width, the whole height, sorry. So why don't we just fix this ourselves? Go down here. Let's go back to the main layout. And in this content layout, yes, let's say height 100%. And in here, height, I believe you don't need height there, but we can debug it live. And you'll see that we only had to add maybe one CSS property to get from a sample code snippet to something we can use in production. So let's try this out again. Yeah, so another great thing you can do without having to refresh every time is you can use the Chrome Dev Tools and just F12. And let's drag this up a little bit and zoom in a tiny bit. So in this content, let's see whether adding height 100% will do what we want. So it doesn't there. So let's try. Let's make this section. Let's make the height view height. That should do the trick there. So instead of 100%, 100 view height works beautifully there. And we can verify that works. So let's just make that code change before we stop the timer to be completely fair. So instead of 100%, let's make it 100 view height and verify our change. Give it a second to compile. There we go. So let's stop the timer. So that took us 8 minutes on the dot pretty much to get a beautiful layout, not just using the default layout and one button, but from completely no project, no Blazor server running to installed and ready to go. So this is a great component library, and it's very quick. So if you want to get a proof of concept to a client or just to build something quickly that looks professional, I'd recommend giving AntBlazor a try. So another trick that AntBlazor has is AntBlazor Pro. So they actually have a template that makes this 8-minute process even faster. So I'm going to actually reset the timer, hit start, and let's try the second method of getting set up. So I'll stop this project and let's actually go to the documentation again. So I'll go back to this docs page, and they have here this templates. So if you run .NET New install AntDesign templates without the version, it'll install the latest one. And this will allow you to run this command, which essentially creates a new project using this template. So I'm going to jump back to Writer and run this command. So I'll go over here. Let's jump into the terminal and let's call this AntBlazor boilerplate Pro. Great, it's just doing a NuGet restore and that's done. So I'm just going to add that project to the solution. So it didn't actually add it to my solution, but it's all right there. So I just have to select the CS project and give it a second to import. Great, so it's in. And now let me just read the README. It's all there. We've got some files. What better way though than just testing it? So let's change our startup project to AntBlazor Boilerplate Pro. I'm going to hit debug and let's see what we get. We've got a loading screen and it alt-tabbed for some reason. Okay, you've got a layout. We've got some Ant Pro components, which are some extra custom components built on AntDesign, which you can read about more by just searching AntDesign Pro. It doesn't need to be specific to Blazor because the design philosophy stays the same. So we've got this nice responsive cider out of the box. So if we go responsive on Chrome, you can actually set this to be responsive based on your viewport width, like you would expect with Bootstrap with the MD, SM, LG, those 2-letter acronyms. You'll notice it's responsive with this card and padding. We actually have a settings option here. So if you want to actually play around with a theme, AntBlazor comes with dark theme out of the box. So in this one template, you can play with dark theme, a very light theme. You can change the main color. So we can actually go to orange as the primary color, or red, for example. Even in dark theme, you can actually change, layout. So you can change the navigation to the top side or a fixed top, which this demo won't show. We can have a fixed header, so if we scroll, the header won't move. It can stay the same. This kind of settings box is actually just for development. So this template has been built to essentially speed up that proof of concept speed even faster. So as a developer, you can just hit some toggles, have one component in, and see it work. So instead of having to make changes of your layout, you can just say, okay, I want dark theme with red. Now I'll make this my production setting, and potentially give users the option to change their theme. But if you want to give your brand, say, a consistent style across websites, this is a great way to do it. So that concludes the 2 boilerplate demos. Having a look at our demo right now, I hope it visually looks a lot different to most demos, especially in Blazor. Usually they'll end up with some beautiful, let's say material design to-do demo, but it's still in the ugly Blazor, gradient purple nav menu that you see on every demo. But here you'll see that we did it quicker with visually better results. So that concludes the boilerplate demo. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. And I wanted to demonstrate the Treeview component as one random component I just grabbed between AntBlazor and how long it would take to build it manually. So I actually had a AntBlazor team member help me out with this demo because he had some spare time. So shout out to him. Big help. So that took him 4 hours to build this demo. So let's just first look at it and then we'll go through the code a little bit. So I'll change the startup to Treeview Comparison, and let's build this. And it's just starting up now. Should be good. Great. So here's the two tree views, and they are all checkable. So I'll show you the two side by side. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Great. So you'll see visually they look similar in functionality. If you look at it, you figure they do the same thing. However, at first glance, you should notice that AntBlazor is, a lot cleaner. It looks professional. It looks like something you'd see in, a product that's been paid money to build. So let's look at what it does. If you check a parent component, it'll select all the children. And this pop-up we have on the right actually is a callback that was added. So it takes a lot of Blazor internal knowledge to be able to build this into callbacks that kind of recurse, as in if you select this parent one, the events will occur for all the children. Say you want this functionality in some code, this would take a lot of time to build. So it took 4 hours when the guy who built this demo has actually worked on the Treeview on AntBlazor. So he went into it knowing how it's built, and it still took 4 hours. So we can have a quick look at the AntBlazor one. It does the same thing, but the checkboxes actually don't lag. I don't know whether you noticed that. It kind of takes a second for the children to check. Yes, so let's look at that again. It all happens instantly. It has the same collapse and expand functionality. You can actually click and drag and add custom events to that, and it will update your list and the parent components automatically out of the box. You can click, so say you have a list of users and you chose to do it in a Treeview, you can select this and hit a button later to do something. So that's just a quick demo of what he built with callbacks and some complex, uncomplex functionality. So let's take a look at the code that it took to build this manual component. So we'll close out these boilerplate projects, go to the Treeview comparison. Okay. So if I go to the pages, you'll see AntBlazor Treeview and manual Treeview on the side. I will go to the manual Treeview. So he built this in a component called NodeView. So essentially, we've got onItem selected, so that's a callback. And nodes, so that takes that list of nodes. We'll look at the data type in a second. And auto expand parent. So if you expand the child, it will expand the parent. So we can see checkbox change. It kind of adds this info like we saw in the pop-up on the top right, which makes it pretty simple to consume, which is what you can do in AntBlazor, but you don't have to code it, of course. You just use their properties and get functionality you expect. So add selection info. This writes a message, but it does a little bit of that extra helper work writing to that pop-up we see. If I show you the log here, this is just the logic that adds to an AntDesign component actually, which is this pop-up. So we've got some clicking functionality here, which is unimportant. So this NodeView component here, we did it all in this one file, just to kind of give you an idea of how much code it takes to write. So we loop through the nodes, create a select node. If it has children, create an expandable node, some custom theming for padding, add a checkbox, but because a checkbox is separate, we need to kind of bind it to a private list of each one, so it's starting to recurse. On change for this, we need to keep it synced with the other part of it that changes. I could go on and describe part of it. There's cascading value, so it cascades itself to the child through a parameter automatically. And it goes down, so we've got these cascading parameters that happen magically. If you don't know about Blazor internals, this would take forever to implement. Parameters, like those events I told you about, and then a lot of internals to make this logic happen. So I could demonstrate, what this does in the Blazor internals, but the main idea of this talk is building beautiful UI without having to know Blazor. You need to be able to build this beautiful UI quickly, and with basically just saying, I want a component called a table, and I have my data from my, API or my repository and throw it in and get a result. So as a comparison, I mean, this is, 200 lines, let's say, with some, best practices of Blazor internals. Now let's take a look at how it's done in the AntBlazor tree view. So we have this component called tree, and we've got some properties we can have that are Booleans in how you want it to function. So it's checkable, you can select multiple, you can drag and drop, expand them all, show an icon if they have it, the data source, what expression, so a C# lambda you want to evaluate to the title. So say you have a user with a first name and a last name property, you can make this just adding 2 strings, or any other sort of expression. Same thing with the child and key. So key is obviously for when you click on it, you'll get your ID if it's a database object, for example. Then there's these on checks and some other things that don't matter too much. This T item is actually telling you the type of this generic component. So AntBlazor uses generic parameters on Blazor components, which is a lesser known feature, but it's very useful, especially for big libraries with cascading parameters that jump down, say from a table to its columns. You can have your type constraints, but sometimes the syntax doesn't detect the type, so you have to put in manually sometimes. So in this case, that's all the code it is to get it working. Other than passing in the data, which we just have some seed data, and the rest of it, the code here is essentially just adding it to this pop-up, which is in our alt tab in this pop-up here. So again, I can show that it works. And so that's a great demo of how quick it is to get set up. One thing I want to show is that all the Blazor components have a lot of examples with different use cases. So expanding on this tree demo, I'll go back to the documentation actually and go to the tree component. So we'll go to the top, click components, and scroll down to tree. So it's in data display and down the bottom here. So say you wanted some disabled checkboxes, it shows you how to do that. And remember, everything has code, so you can always copy and paste it in, and get the functionality you want. We can show how to print, check nodes, some keys, load data asynchronously. So say you're loading data from an API and you only want to have quick loading times and load data if they click it. So say there's a lot of children in a tree for whatever your data type is, it can load it with a nice little spin asynchronously. And of course, this recurses as often as you like, which is a beautiful, beautiful feature. The one thing that I don't see in the other component libraries, so they demonstrate how to get started with a component. They don't show you how to use all their complex parameters. They just have it there, and you kind of have to play with them. Do I put in a Boolean here? Is this an expression? Can I even use this? You never know with the other ones. With these, you can essentially scroll down, see what you want visually, and say, oh, I want to search. How do I do a search with a tree view? Well, you test it out, you go, oh, it auto completes and highlights my search term. I want this, copy paste in. So for a reasonably simple component and a lesser used one nowadays for web design at least, they've still got a lot of component samples, sorry. So for example, using a table, a huge one if you're doing internal software or admin pages alike. There's demos and demos and demos and demos, I'll tell you. So whatever type of functionality you want, whether it's fixed columns or sortable or async loading or multi-select or inline editing, there's samples here. So let's say we want to go down to a random one. Let's say you want routing on your table based on your page and the actual physical route you have in your browser. Supports that out of the box, shows you how to do it with your code. I'll scroll down, show you some of the cooler ones. Having sort in columns, it's as simple as adding to your column sortable, and you'll notice that you can click to sort ascending, descending, or cancel out of the box. So let me actually go down. There's some more complex niche examples down the bottom. So say you want to be able to edit inline. They have that too. You can type something and have your actions. So say, on blur, save to a database, which on blur, of course, is when you blur the component by selecting something else. All of this is heavily customizable. So, you can have nested tables. You can display, subdata with tables, which is very similar to Treeview, but if you wanted to display more data, for example, this is a great way. And yeah, we can even, show hide columns if you like. It's a great thing. Tags. I think I've sold tables in the documentation, so I'll stop praising that part, and let's jump into the next demo. So what I'm going to do is, if you're familiar with the Blazor template, they have a weather forecast class. So I'm just going to use the table component and show you how to get set up with that quickly. So what I'm actually going to do is use that Ant Pro template, and we'll add a table into that index. So let's do that. So let me actually just check if the Ant Pro keeps a data forecast. No, it doesn't. That's fine. So in this forecast solution, let's make a new project, and I will call it default Blazor app, and we can use server, that's fine. I just want to steal the weather forecast service and model. Great. And then let's use the CLI again. I'll just stop the currently running project to save a bit of grunt. And we'll call this one AntBlazor weather forecast. And again, like I did for the other one, we'll add this via our existing project. So AntBlazor weather forecast, CS project. Great. Give it a second to add. There we go. So let's just go into our data folder and copy these two. We can just copy the whole folder. And in our Ant template, we'll paste this in. And we won't add this to Git now. I'll add that at the end of the talk. So all these demos you'll be able to get on GitHub. At the end of the PowerPoint, I'll have a link to the GitHub repository. I'll actually just push that at the end of this talk, and you'll be able to see it live. So in this data, we have weather forecast. If you're not familiar, it's got a date, a temperature, and a summary. Let me just fix up the namespace. So I'll just adjust namespaces in folder. A great functionality of Writer if you've never used it before. And the last thing we have to do, of course, is inject this service. So in builder.services, we'll add a singleton of type weather forecast service. Great. So now this service is available in our components. So I can go now to our pages, welcome.razor, which is the index. And inside of this card, which is a visual wrapper, if you're not familiar with the card, I'll delete the contents. And let me just verify that it's empty. It's great to test your changes incrementally instead of doing big changes. So I forgot to change the startup project. Let me fix that. So let's hit stop. Change it to AntBlazor weather forecast. I'll hit run. And give that a second to load. Great. So we've got that same beautiful loading. And let's give it a second. Okay. So it is empty now. It's got that nice welcome title and it's got no content. So that's great. Let's continue with this. So if you're familiar with Blazor, what you would normally do with creating services using dependency injection is you'd have it in your constructor or a public parameter, depending on your framework. Here we have @inject. So I'll just inject the weather forecast service, and it's private. So we'll give it the private naming convention. Now, you can do nice wrappers to have loading with async functions, but for now, we'll just use onInitialized and have a private list of weather forecast. So up here, we'll create private list of weather forecast and call it weather forecasts. Great. And we can just onInitialized go weather forecasts equals and our injected service. And let's get forecast async. So I forgot that it was async and not synchronized. So let's instead just type onInitialized again and use the async overload. So let me just swap it over. Great. Delete our synchronized version and chuck in await and make this async. Great. Now, I believe the parameter gives you date time. Let's just jump in and see what it is. So start date time. Great. Date time now should suffice. And this expects a list, so we may as well cast it from the array to a list. That's fine. There we go. Great. So now we know we have weather forecasts, and this loads asynchronously. So Blazor will automatically do UI refreshes if it knows a component, a property, of its component is used in the front end. So for this, if we use @if to do code inside of the HTML, we'll say if the weather forecast equals null, that means it's loading, right? Because by default it's null. So a great component of AntDesign is the spin. It's just the normal loading spinner, but obviously styled. Otherwise, we'll do another check, and if weather forecasts.any, if there's not any, let's do a result, which will actually look at the documentation to find how to get the correct result for a empty list info result. So let's again leverage the great documentation, find the result component, scroll down. Let's say we want this info one. That looks great. Show code. And copy this result. So let's do that. Result, and we'll say no forecasts for today. And extra is a property you can add custom Blazor render fragment, so it could be a child component to the bottom. But for now, we'll just have no extra. So what we have right here is fine, just a title, and the default is an info one. That's great. And then finally, here we know we have some data. So with this, let's get started with a table. So instead of having to know how a table is written, let's just copy the sample and modify it. This is a nice sample of how to use it, which does have some complex logic with changing the pages, but we'll strip all of that out and make it simple to just display the list as is. So we won't need a reference to the table. The type of item is weather forecast. The data source, we can make weather forecasts. The total, we can just make this C#. So let's make an expression here and say weather forecast.count. So it'll run dynamically. Page index, selected rows, page size. This kind of thing is if you want paginated tables, which naturally takes a bit of logic. We'll display it all in one. And on change we won't have because a page won't change if we have no pages. Great. To help with the text highlighting, which looks broken on my machine right now actually, we can use a custom property of Blazor, actually not AntBlazor. It's for cascading components to rename a parameter. So this context here is actually passed from the table to each column. So this content here is iterated for each value in the table. So it's kind of descriptive in how you display your data instead of having to worry about how it happens. So let me fix that. Visually, it looks like you have a table, and then inside it you have some columns, and you can change format, make it sortable, that kind of thing, which is a great way of getting UI that makes sense. It really doesn't require you to know much about HTML. you can look at a sample and it makes sense with the naming conventions and just general flow. So with this context, I'll call this table context just to make sure there's nothing conflicting, and ignore the red that's yelling at us because we know we're right, and it's just a little bit of a bug. So in actual fact, the properties used in this demo on the AntBlazor demo actually uses the weather forecast. So we can run this. For the delete, we don't have that yet. So for this example, I'm just gonna get rid of a delete button. Let's hit debug and see some issues. So basically when you use the column, not the column, sorry, the chart library, which is another great feature of AntBlazor, which I can quickly show you. It uses G2plot to give you a lot of different beautiful charts straight in Blazor, which is a little bit out of scope of this demo, but something great to know of in the back of your head. It does have some conflicting namespaces. So it says in our error here that column is used in charts as well. So let's just suffix them with the namespace for all of the usages, as you would in C# code. And let's see if this has any more conflicting namespaces. Great. So we've got some issues with this. Let's check our forecast type. So there's no ID here. So the demo actually is using something different to us. So we don't have any ID. We'll remove that. And let's see if there's hot in our data. No. So we just have date, temperature, and summary. Great. So date, temperature, and summary. So I'll remove this, which this table looks a lot more simple than the first demo back on the component, which might be something to improve on the documentation. So let's hit debug. And we've got our demo going. So give it a second to load. The Pro template, of course, takes a quick minute to load because it's got a lot in the background, like the developer settings to help you, which has a bit of an initial loading time. So you'll see right away the demo here visually is, a huge difference from the out-of-the-box Blazor one. So we've got a sortable table, which, ascend, descend, paging, but we've got no pages right now. You can actually hide these pages if you the page numbers and arrows if you have none, and want to do it manually, for example, or just with routing. Everything's customizable. So visually, remember where we are. We've got a beautiful layout, this table that works with data pretty descriptively using the words. And now, just as a bit of a stark difference to juxtapose, we'll have our default Blazor app and run it. And let's look at our weather forecast that you get pretty much with the exact same code, but using the out-of-the-box components. So we have fetch data, and we've got our boring layout that everyone knows, you're familiar with, you see it, you kind of, personally, knowing AntBlazor is a thing, I kind of gag a little bit seeing this because I know that it takes, what do we time, 5 minutes to get set up with a nice, beautiful layout and this table. It's not sortable. I can't really use it like I would any other table. And that's pretty much that for that weather forecast demo. So let's jump to the next one. So we've done getting set up. We've done some more complex ones using a table and a tree view. Now let's look at how you would work with a more complete project that's basically in production, and how you make code changes to a bigger project if you're a developer coming to an existing AntBlazor project. So I'll demo this one I built a few days ago. So as context, this took me about 3 or 4 days to build. And it's users, and I, as a developer, we hate storing user secrets like passwords. So I just use Microsoft login to, not have to worry about any of that. So you'll notice this similar layout with a header, some nice expandable menus, toggleable, these tables we looked at, a footer, some hoverable cards, some beautiful forms. We can create data and automatically refresh. We can use some selects, which change components, have some, nice graphs and data output. So I'll just show the README for this project, which if you want to check out on GitHub, it's just under my username and then AntBlazor. It's linked in the PowerPoint and the demo resources, which again, we'll link at the end of this talk. So the README here, I've filled out kind of the epics. You can use this as context, this website's to help you budget by integrating with UpBank. So, you can put expenses, recurring expenses, that kind of thing, and get powerful insights. So this is a nice little demo of the UI components I used, all AntBlazor, all done in that same workflow I demonstrated, where I'm just on the documentation. I look at a sample, I copy it. If I don't know what I want, I look at the overview and go, oh, I want this, and put it in. So we've got some nice notifications, some, icons on top of an icon, graphs with hovering, responsive. So on mobile, it actually behaves completely differently as you would expect out of the box. A nice calendar select, a drop down using an enum, or API results out of the box. There's a great enum select component, so you can just give it the type and what you want it to bind to, and it'll do the rest for you, which is a great feature that a lot of people want to implement on Blazor. I showed the result. This one's a success one, another form, some danger buttons, that kind of thing. So that's it for the quick overview of this project. So it's big. One thing I want to show you is, let's say we have a client who's using this website and they say the clear token button happens too quickly. It should confirm. So let's dive in to see how we can make that change. So let me go to the code base and close our old demos. And here's the AntBlazor solution. So it follows clean architecture. Roughly, it doesn't go full mediator. It's somewhere in the middle because of the size, but that is completely out of scope for this talk. So the way it's architected is the pages follow the menu. Straightforward. So we noticed that let's go to the demo actually on this screen. So I'll go to the URL and settings, access token, clear token. It happens instantly. If you hit clear token, it happens without confirmation. So let's follow this flow. Pages, settings, and access token settings. Now, there is a bit of code here with logic that wraps repositories and APIs to make me not have to repeat spinning logic, except for this component where there's some complex logic where I did have to do it manually. So under this divider form, we'll notice that it was next to the save button in the form. So visually, we can go, it's in a form item, clear button. Okay. I know the component I want to use in AntBlazor, but let's go to the documentation again and have a browse through in the overview and see if you can spot it yourself, which one we might want to use to give some confirmation. So there are actually a few options. We could use a sort of modal pop-up that says, are you sure? Hit OK. We could have a draw pop-up. That's less used than a modal. But there is a nice little component, which, let's see if I scrolled past it. I probably did. We could use an alert too, that could work. There's a thing called a popover. So we can add functionality over something, like it says pops over. So in the demo, hover me, we don't want hover, we want something on click, right? So you click the button and this pop-up comes with a little button that says, are you sure? So click me, let's see. It appears with something, great. So that looks like 90% of what we want. And we can just follow, okay, it's the third button. We'll just copy this much of the demo, swap over, and paste it nearby where we want. So this popover, like many AntBlazor components and Blazor components in general, take child content. So since the popover wraps a component, its child is obviously what it wraps. So let's replace this demo click me button with our click button and fix the formatting there quickly. And the content template, you can use this as a property and then put it in code at the bottom, but I think visually that breaks it up a bit. So there's actually two ways to set a render fragment, which is a component in Blazor. So I'll delete this, and you can write it actually as, let's cut out this button actually, so that syntax highlighting shows us. We can have template and say content template and child content. So child content by Razor ended is the child content or the body of a component. And the content template, like we saw in this demo, is what pops up. So now we can utilize the code in HTML functionality by having it right here instead of a property. So for this, let's just put in a button, and let's call it make it a danger button, and let's say yes, and we'll have a bit of text. Let's say, are you sure? And have that little button, and let's make it a small button. Okay. And then instead of having the on-click on this clear token button, let's just move that logic to this yes button. And let's see what happens. So we've wrapped our button with a popover and made the content of the popover. So it's fairly niche logic, but again, I hope through these demos you've seen again and again, the flow is the same. You go to the documentation, it tells you how to do it, and you just modify it for your use case. So let's go to this access token and hit clear token. We can remove this title, of course, but this must be a default we left in. Are you sure? Yes, and we get the same functionality. Great. So I think that concludes that demo. So I think that's all the demos I want to squeeze in for today. So I'll wrap it up. Like I mentioned just before, I love the documentation of AntBlazor. We show it again and again of where all the components have demos for every use case. And as a backend engineer or someone who just doesn't want to worry this time or for this project about how you're going to set up your UI or some niche parts of Blazor, you can easily get set up with these great components with great properties and great documentation. And even if you run into a bug in AntBlazor, it's open source. So the community, whether it's the main maintainer or contributors or one-off contributors who haven't seen the project yet, will probably fix it or give you a reply in a GitHub issue, for example, on how to do your code. So the resources, this link here, GitHub, my account owner, blast off with blazor.demos. I'll make that public just after this talk and push the code we made just now. AntBlazor, like I demonstrated, is on my account too. That's public right now. Feel free to leave a star if you like it. AntBlazor, that's antblazor.com. I figured I should leave it in there since it's the topic of the talk. Acknowledgements, so that's a Slavic name. I asked him how to pronounce it, and he said Andrew. So I'm going to say thanks, Andrew. He's the AntBlazor team member who made that Treeview demo much better than my work in progress proof of concept. And then Brady Strout, he's a fellow SSW employee actually over there, helped me with the PowerPoint a little bit. And why not? We'll shout out JK as well, a huge help. He's sitting here too. So as I promised at the start, if you have the SSW rewards app, here's the QR code, which you can get some points to get those rewards. So, like I mentioned, the Flask and Home product, as well as this cool smartwatch that you might earn after a few talks. So I'll leave that up for a second if you're having troubles. But in that demos repository, I'll leave a copy of this PowerPoint. So if you're worried about it, or if I skip this slide before you can scan it, don't worry, you can go back and scan this. So if you've got feedback, I love feedback, good, bad, the ugly. Please. I always want to improve, so don't hold back if you think something can be improved. I'd love to hear also where I did great, but constructive criticism is more important. at least to me. So awesome. That will take you to the form. And thank you for watching. So if you guys have questions, Adam should be passing them to me now through the talk if I can hear him.
Excellent,
Adam?
Luke. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. That was
Awesome.
A lot of work. Good job. You look good. Ant looks good. That's awesome. I heard of AntDesign many years ago in China where they were raving about it.
Right.
But
Right.
Obviously I didn't think it would transfer as nicely to the West, but it has. So tell me,
Right.
what is that ant icon?
Ant icon.
The little ants.
What are you talking about? I don't see an ant, Adam.
No, you put little ants all over the place.
Ants? What? It's just a blank. Are you talking about a QR code? They're squares. They're not ants.
Right. No, I was talking about the actual ants. There we go. So.
Oh, those guys. Oh, I thought I was staring at the screen for too long.
Now,
you know how it is.
Do you know why? Do you know why it's called ant?
Tell me.
I'm trying to remember now, but there was Alipay. All the Chinese products have a animal that goes with it. So
Right.
So they went with ants. Now tell me, I want to know, what is the performance story?
Great. So the performance of AntDesign is kind of similar to the story of how Blazor hosting models work. So WebAssembly, AntBlazor, sorry, was built for WebAssembly first, which is running on your machine with WebAssembly. So its performance is great on the local machine. You can even have PWAs, so you have a mobile app with AntBlazor. So the performance of that is wonderful locally. The only caveat is the initial loading time, which is an issue with Blazor as a whole, where it can take a second or two to load all those assemblies. However, you can have a normal loading spinner that, keeps that visual story while it loads for a second initially, and then you have, absolutely no issue. It's all local. And then we have Blazor Server. So that one is where all the logic and performance and, all that is on the server. So we have a connection through SignalR that sends the UI updates to the clients. So the initial loading time for that is completely flipped. It's, as instant as it is to connect to the server. So as you would expect for any performant website. Other than that, you've got a little bit of lag between, some actions for server, especially if it's a server that's on the opposite side of the world. However, if it's in your local country or maybe hosted on premises server, Blazor server performance, you wouldn't notice that it's, running all your UI changes between the server and then back to you. It, especially with the animations, sometimes mask how long it takes actually, because the CSS still actually runs on your machine.
Right, yeah. Okay. So I have a few other just things with the perf. I have a big list of questions that I'd love to just go through that were all popping in my head as I was watching that. But have they done any comparisons of the, say, the Ant grid in Blazor versus the Ant grid in Angular or React?
Right. In terms of actual profiling, we haven't done proper benchmarks, but qualitatively, a lot of people obviously have mentioned that, it's Blazor. We noticed that it is laggy, and there have been improvements to the performance. So a recent pull request by Andrew, the guy who made that demo, moved some of the overlay logic that took a few seconds to be a few hundred milliseconds on server when your server's across the world, which with transitions is great. So yeah, no benchmarks, but it's something we're working on. So while we're improving the performance, obviously we're gonna do some benchmarks to get some actual numbers. Okay.
Well, I'd certainly love to know, is the Angular or React grid faster versus Blazor versus, Dev Express? I think that would all be fascinating. Let me move on to another thing that was popping in my head, because I went and looked at the issues and the pull requests and things. Obviously, this thing has Chinese origins. It's used by Alipay and Alibaba, and everybody in China loves them. That's like Elon Musk in the West. So they love all that stuff. But I'm seeing a lot of Chinese. You're seeing a lot of issues and descriptions in Chinese in the repository. Is that a hassle? Is it in the documentation too?
So yeah, for AntBlazor especially, because of AntDesign's origins in China, there are mainly translations in English and Chinese. So a lot of the users actually are 50-50. So we have great English contributors. The main contributor who's done most of the work, he is from China, but he speaks great English, so he can talk to both guys. In terms of issues, obviously, if you're a Western person, you might write your issue or bug or pull request in English, but some of the non-bilingual people from China, for example, might just write in Chinese. So that's the only part that might be difficult if you have to translate something that's written once. But in terms of documentation, that's got translations that are great for Chinese and English.
Rightio. Okay, so you're not finding it too much friction?
No, there's none at all, really. So, I've never had an issue with it.
So another thing that I noticed, and I thought this might be a reason that it wouldn't do well in the West, is that when you're in China, the UIs are a bit different. They're like busier. Like when I showed at an event, oh, wow, this is so busy. Look at Twitter. And they go, just the homepage of Twitter before you log in. They go, it doesn't look like a serious site. There's nothing there. Like it's too empty. Do you find that the AntDesign, is there, does it feel different?
Yeah. So that's kind of the thing that I mentioned in the talk about how the visual philosophy of material design, for example, gets butchered by a developer just using components in a wrong way. So one thing that if the screen share's still up, I would love to show, where basically, let me show, there's a discussion on GitHub, the new feature, or reasonably new feature, where essentially there's a spot for guys to post where they're using AntBlazor in production. And a lot of these are actually from Chinese companies, and a lot of them are internal. So I have had a browse through here, and I've noticed some of the internal ones are cluttered, and like you said, kind of tell a different visual story to how sort of, Western websites are typically built, especially using design practices. But as a whole, if you copy snippets and just make small changes and, think about your components, you won't butcher UI, really. Here, the colors and spacing is a bit off, but if you read the documentation, for example, on space items, which make spacing between a list of components together easy, you can get a lot of improvement very quickly.
Okay, all right. How about I ask you about the philosophy of how the open source project runs compared with Western open source projects, where there's a series of conventions and conciliatory softness when you maybe want to make a change that might impact many people. They leave it up for a while and they let everybody argue. Sometimes in China things happen a lot faster and there's less of that discussion. Do you feel that in the way the projects run? And who's the boss?
So there is James Young. He's actually a Microsoft MVP. He's in China. He founded and runs the project. He does, he's done 300,000 lines of commits. He's all over it. So he's the guy who does most of the work. In terms of the way he runs the open source project, he actually is very great in trying to get the community to work on it. So let me pull up on my screen share AntBlazor. In the issues, he'll quite often say, if you have an idea for something, so let's click on a random issue, and some contributors will say, can you do a minimal repro? And if someone says, I reckon you can fix it or build it in this way, he'll quite often say, hey, can you, can someone, specifically the person who built it, submit a pull request to fix it? So he's quite open and to, anyone making contributions. The code review happens, every day essentially. If we look at the insights, we can look at the contributors, which show a little graph of how often code happens. It's, running hard. He's very, very active, so it's got the same practices you expect from Western code. It's got, GitHub Actions. It shows code coverage on pull requests. One nice thing that it has that not a lot of open source repos have is it actually automatically shows code coverage through a GitHub action. So, for example, we'll show one here. It has a nice report that happens through a bot of code coverage. So, unit testing, what your code changes actually affected, files, and, that kind of thing. So overall, I think it still follows what you'd expect from a normal software company or an open source community. You wouldn't really notice that it's predominantly from a Chinese culture.
That's amazing. I love those visualizations. They're phenomenal.
It's great, yeah.
Okay, let me ask about something that I'm not sure that they worry about as much in China, accessibility. Now, I'm not sure everybody worries about it here either, but certainly government organizations, big ones, care about it. What's the story with accessibility?
Right. So in terms of that, I'm not as familiar as I would be other parts of AntBlazor, but I know that they still use HTML under the hood. So the same sort of accessibility you'd get with HTML best practices you get. And typically, if you pass in a parameter, like for an image, a title, it'll automatically put, the alt tag, for example, get, screen readers and things like that. Just at face value from what I've used, I don't think it's focused on accessibility, but it's, something that can be added, for example, if someone wants it.
Okay. I'm seeing some comments going on the chat, but one thing I wasn't aware of, there is actually more docs in English than in Chinese, which that's certainly been a big change from what I knew. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
It's there's been a lot of work on the English actually. I don't speak Chinese, so I can't speak to the quality or volume of the Chinese docs.
Right. Okay. Oh well, I can't tell you how cool this is to hear. I just think it's so important for so useful when just citizens of the West and the East are working together. It's that's pretty awesome. Tell me.
I think.
I think
for users from Western, devs, they see AntDesign and go, oh, it's a Chinese thing. It's not English. We can just use Material Design or something like that, or Bootstrap. But I hope this talk kind of shows that no, it's ready for English and it's ready for our culture as well.
Awesome. Tell me a little comparison with AntBlazor versus React versus Angular. I was just, I'd love to just know, are those skills transferable once you are pretty good?
Absolutely. So the APIs are pretty much the same. So by pretty much, roughly the names of the components, like in React, you'll notice they're very similar and the properties you get are very similar, especially the concept of knowing the components and the general flow of how you make callbacks happen, for example. So especially in terms of getting the visuals there, not so much the actions and the callbacks and how you get data flowing, but the visuals definitely, and layout and being able to use documentation. The AntBlazor documentation is very, very, very close to AntDesign documentation, like the React library.
If you were talking to a boss who says, I think it's just safer, let's just go Bootstrap, what would be your quintessential argument why not to do that?
Well, I think it depends. It always depends on the project. If it's something facing clients or the public, I'd suggest that the layout, you just show him those layout demos and that discussion thread, you can scroll through and say, hey, this is very quick to get UI that looks like this Ant Pro template, we can customize it to be our company very, very quickly. We can say, for example, at SSW, we're red, and in that Ant Pro, you'll notice I focused on the red color with dark theme. We could use AntDesign very quickly and, use our red very, with no code change except for saying use red. The the beautiful way that it integrates with APIs and speeds up that kind of process, you can suggest to your boss that it saves dollars, it looks better, and it's, transferable. So, if they're stuck on Bootstrap, I'd just show the difference between the two and kind of convince them.
Okay. What about the 24 grid system? Is that limiting?
So because it's expanded from the typical Bootstrap 12 system, where it's just essentially double, if you're used to using Bootstrap Grid, just times it by 2. If it's not limiting, if anything, it allows you more freedom, which obviously allows you more freedom to do UI poorly. But like you mentioned, Adam, a little bit about how you reckon the Chinese websites are a little bit more cluttered. So their tables and whatnot, they might use that grid system a little bit with smaller columns. So if you just generally use wide columns that, use 8 width instead of 4 or something like that, you can't really mess up and see anything different from a Bootstrap column.
For the Westerners that haven't seen what I'm just talking about there with the noisy UI, go to their YouTube sites such as Billy, and you will see that's their video sites. The comments go all over on top of the video. It's hilarious the way that they love stuff going on. It's really confronting at first, and then it's fun. When you, if you're a user of, say, Telerik, I'd just like to, that's a pretty mainstream UI library. Kendo UI and these things. They give you 1 or 2 examples, and then they say, "There's your API." Tell me the equivalent story in AntDesign.
Right. So what you'll see, like you mentioned, is they'll give you 1 or 2 demos, and they'll just give you a table of the properties and what data they can take. So it might be some weird like event callback with a generic, and at first glance you have no idea what any of that means. Like I kind of showed with the few components I demonstrated, there's over 10, more than that, if not, examples with full code samples that you can use in your production code straight out of the box. Essentially, like I demonstrated, you just make a couple code changes to fit your data and maybe get rid of some pages or something like that, like we did with the table, and you're good to go. You don't have to wrestle with how do I make this event callback work. You can just even chop and change between 2 samples. Say one has half of what you want and the other has the other half. You copy this property, for example, on the demo function, and get set up. And then the rest of the code is just your business code that is no different to an API or any code that a C# dev is used to.
All right. Well, that's been a fantastic look. I want to tell you that I was just doing a quick Google, and we know that Blazor is brand new. Obviously, AntDesign is the most popular in React. Everybody obviously, is there a Vue story as well? I assume there would be.
I'm not too sure on Vue. There's definitely a library for it, but I haven't played around with it.
Because Vue is crazy popular in China. React has 800,000 pages, Angular 300,000 pages, and React 70,000 pages. So it's pretty new, and it's already getting there. I just want to finish off with one little comment that Andreas Birken said, which I think is worthwhile to repeat. He said, .NET 6 will allow to call Blazor components from JavaScript, React, Angular, Vue, etc. Yesterday's Blazor stand-up has a nice demo in this area if you want to know more. So that was fantastic.
Great.
And I just want to thank you so much, Luke. You did an awesome job, and you gave us a little bit of a window into the establishing ecosystem that's building around Vue in AntDesign in the West. And if you're going to choose a framework for Blazor, there's a good one. So with that, we will see you all next month for the SSW user group. Good night.
Awesome. Good night, everyone.